Clifford Bates, and welcome to our next session of reading Machiavelli's Discourses. There was a break. I'm sorry, it was a flu. I got sick and I was not able to make some recordings, and because of that, and now we're playing catch up. So today we're wrapping up book 1 of the Discourses. Today, looking at chapter 55. It'll be a little longer one. How easily things may be continued in those cities in which the multitude is not corrupt, and that where there is equality, a principle cannot be made, and where there is not, a republic cannot be made. In other words, he's basically, the introduction is about the question of if the multitude is not corrupt, and that there is equality, a principle cannot be made. And where there is not equality, a republic cannot. If there's no equality, then you can't have a republic. So let's continue right into it, the first paragraph. Though it has been very much discussed above, by that he means literally Discourses 1:16 through 18, right? What is to be feared and hoped from corrupt cities. Nevertheless, it does not appear to me outside the purpose to consider a decision of the Senate regarding the vow of Camillus had made to give the 10th part of the booty of Ventilis to Apollo. Right? He's going to give the 10th of the booty to of Ventilis. The Romans attacked Ventilis. Since that booty had come into the hands of the Roman plebs, and they could not otherwise supervise the account of it, the Senate made an edict that each person should present in public the 10th part of what he had taken as booty. In other words, they had to take, even though the stuff already got into the hands of the plebes, said, okay, you have to take 1/10 of whatever you got. You give 1/10 if they show it. You have to present in public the 10th part of the booty. Now, although that decision did not take place, since the Senate later took another mode, and by another way satisfied Apollo to satisfaction of the plebs, right? This is book 5, Livy, in Livy's book 5, sections 23-25, right? Nevertheless, by such a decision, one sees how much the Senate trusted in the goodness of the plebs, and that it judged that no one would not present exactly all that had been commanded of him by such an edict. On the other side, one sees that the plebs thought not of defrauding the edict in any part by giving less than it's owed, but by freeing itself by showing open indignation. In other words, they didn't defy by defrauding, but rather but of the freeing itself from it by showing open indignation, anger about this. This example, with many others that have been brought up above, shows how much goodness and how much religion were in the people, and how much good was to be hoped from it. In other words, the point here is that it's the religion, the people's faith, the people's belief that they were not going to, okay, this is supposed to be the gods' things. I didn't like the fact that he given it to the gods. I have to do this. Now, of course, the Senate kind of realized that this was going to be unpopular, and they satisfied it by another mode. But they made the ruling that they would just only have to give the people, the people would have to deliver it themselves up, right? So therefore, it's trusting on the people, the Senate did, and relied on the goodness of the people, the people's religion, their faithfulness, and they could do it, and the people were going to do it. They trusted them that they would do it, and the people were mostly going to do it. The argument is they didn't think of defrauding the edict by showing up with less, but rather by just being angry with the edict, right? 2, and truly, where there is not goodness, nothing good can be hoped for, as it cannot be hoped for in the provinces that in these times that are seen to be corrupt, as is Italy above all others. And France and Spain also retain part of such corruption. In other words, you have parts of the country, the population is so corrupt, they won't keep their word. They will cheat, they will lie, they'll deceive. In other words, and he says that, okay, that nothing good can be hoped for in that sense. If as many disorders as arise in Italy are not seen every day in those provinces, it derives not so much from the goodness of the people, which is in good part lacking, as from having one king and maintain them united not only through his virtue, but through the orders of those kingdoms, which is not yet spoiled. In other words, okay, let's say there is order. There's order. It's not, the order is not due to the goodness of the people. The order that's there is only due, Machiavelli is saying, because of the not necessarily the virtue of he says not so much the virtue through his virtue, but the orders, institutions that have not yet spoiled. In the province of Germany, this goodness and this religion are still seen to be great in those people, which make many republics there live free, and there observe their laws so that no one from outside or inside dares to seize them. Now here, Prince 10, right, talking about Machiavelli wrote 3 short reports on the freed German cities. In December 1507, he sent a mission to the Emperor Maximilian, after which he wrote his Rapporto di della Causa di Magna in 1508. The following year, he wrote a Discourses separo la Causa di Magna di Soprano, Imperator, for the use of the Florentine ambassadors. In 1509, a second legation took Machiavelli to the camp of Maximilian at Mantua, and on his return, he wrote the Rattilio della Casca della Magna for these 3 works, which can be found in the Tuta di Opera, the works, the works, Tuta di Opera, the writings in Martini and pages 63 to 71. Okay, so to show, in other words, that the example of the German cities, the German republics, are such that they and because of what he's saying, that they're people that the people that they have faith, and they have faith in their institutions, and that no one from outside or inside dare seize them. To show that it is true that a good part of that ancient goodness reigns in them, I wish to give the example such as given above of the Senate and the Roman plebs, right? When it occurred to those republics that they needed to spend some quantity of money for the public account, they are used to having those magistrates or consuls that have the authority for it assess on all of the inhabitants of the city 1% or 2% of what each has of value. Okay, this is the German cities. They you have to give 1% or 2%, right? When a decision has been made, each presents himself before the collector of such a duty according to the order of the town, and having first taken oath to pay the fitting amount, he throws into a chest so designated what according to his conscience it appears to him he ought to pay. Of this payment there is no witness except him who pays. Hence it can be conjectured how much goodness and how much religion are yet in those men. In that sense, they pay their taxes. It should be reckoned that each pays the true amount. For if it were not paid, that impost would not bring in the quantity that they planned on according to the former ones that they had been accustomed to collect. Pardon. Yeah. When it was not brought in, the fraud would have been recognized, and when recognized, another mode than this would have been taken. Such goodness is so much more to be admired in those times, as it is rarer. Indeed, one sees it remaining only in that province of the Germans. Again, this is another. Machiavelli here. Now, this is another part of the Tacitus myth, right? We can argue the discussion of Tacitus on Germany. Here he highlights that the German cities are the most free here, and the people seem to be the ones that still have a faithfulness. Now, this is interesting. So the German cities, in a sense, this is a very interesting point he raises here. The German provinces, and the Swiss too. The Swiss, likewise the Swiss, right? This arises from two things. One, not having had great intercourse with their neighbors. And intercourse, this is, again, conversations. Literally, it's conversations with their neighbors. For neither have the latter gone to their home, nor have they gone to someone else's home, because they have been content with those goods, to live by those foods, to dress with those woolens that the country provides. In other words, they're self-sufficient in that sense, right? They're autarkous. They're not relying on external goods, external habits, external foods, right? Hence, the cause of every intercourse or conversation, literally, right, has the beginnings of every corruption that had been taken away. For they had not been able to pick up either French or Spanish or Italian customs, which nations altogether are the corruption of the world. Right? This is, again, literally, this is interesting. In Regato del Casa de Magna, Machiavelli speaks of commerce between the Venetians and the German cities. This is that when you have here Machiavelli seems to be his argument here is conversation, intercourse, trade. We can argue that. Machiavelli seems to suggest that the passage here is that trade corrupts. That's interesting. That the trade makes that in other words, it leads to corruption. And now this could be an argument against globalism here. This could be a very interesting argument against Machiavelli, contra globalism, because the idea is that trade, people start bringing in foreign and alien customs and habits and desires and things that no longer love their own, no longer are used to their own. They're never satisfied with their own. They want something alien, and that this corrupts them. Okay, it's very interesting in that sense. And so therefore, in other words, the corruption of having French and Spanish and Italian customs, which nations altogether are the corruption of the world. In that sense, right? The other cause is that those republics in which, so therefore the first one, the reason is those cities don't really engage in trade. That's his argument. They don't engage in that much trade. They don't really associate or want those other things. Okay, that's one thing. The other cause is that those republics in which a political and uncorrupt way of life is maintained do not endure that any citizen of theirs either be or live in the usage of a gentleman. In other words, they don't live above their means, Indeed, they maintain among themselves an even equality. And to the lords and gentlemen who are in the province, they are very hostile. If by chance someone falls into their hands, they kill them as the beginning of corruption and the cause of every scandal. So in other words, if it comes in pretending that he's greater than they are, in other words, the Lord or something like that. In other words, someone who by chance falls into their hands, someone great or someone powerful, they will. So So there's an equality here that does not tolerate those who wish to lord it over the other. To clarify this name of gentleman, such as it may be, I say those who are called gentlemen who live idly in abundance from the returns of their possessions, without having any care either for cultivation or for the necessities, other necessity troubles of living. So his term gentleman is someone who doesn't cultivate, doesn't work to cultivate, and doesn't and lives by abundance of his returns of their possession. They don't have to cultivate or other troubles. In other words, in other words, the idle wealth. They're idle. Idle hands of the devil's workshop. Okay, right? That's Luther, right? The idly rich. They live idly in abundance. And in fact, this is again, this is kind of echoes what Aristotle says about the wealthy in Book 4, Politics 11, right? Book 4, Chapter 11, right? About the very wealthy will be arrogant and, but here he talks about their idleness, right? And they are corrupting or dangerous. They're a threat to the republic in that sense. Such as these are pernicious in every republic and in every province, but more pernicious are those who, beyond of said fortunes, command from a castle and have subjects who obey them. Okay. In other words, so therefore, this is they live from a castle, command from a castle, and have subjects who obey them. Of the two species of men, the kingdom of Naples, the town of Rome, and Romagna, and Lombardy are filled. In other words, there are people who live the great and the. Again, this is the problem. The people are poor and peasantry. Again, this is repeating of what Aristotle says in Book 4, Chapter 11, about the problem of the rich, the idly rich who command and control, and the poor who are submissive and slavish. And that therefore this is the danger of this kind of situation. From this arises that in these provinces no republic or political way of life has ever emerged. For such kinds of men are altogether hostile to every civilization. In other words, Machiavelli is very interesting. When he says civilization, he means a republic or a political way of life. That seems to be the account here. This is when he says something is civilized, and I think now remember the Latin word civilis, this is political. This is the civitas, right? The civitas, the civic. This is this public, right? The public world, the political world, and that therefore this conception of that you're going to be political. This is civilization in that sense, way. That civilization is political in the Machiavelli's usage here, and he says that in a situation, and actually this highlights Aristotle's point about the very wealthy and the very poor. There cannot be politics without the middling. Everyone have just enough. In other words, this is politics 4:11. This again. The dangers of the very rich and the very poor, destabilizing. And that's why this is, Aristotle argues, and Machiavelli concurs here in this chapter. To wish to introduce a republic into a province made in a like mode would not be possible. But if anyone were arbiter of them and wished to reorder them, there would be no other way than to make a kingdom there. In other words, they only can make a kingdom. You can only have a kingdom, a monarchy in that sense, a kingdom, a monarchical rule. You couldn't have, it was not political rule. It would be, and actually this is why, again, chapter 1, Book 1 of the Politics, Book 1, Chapter 1 of Politics, the distinction between political rule and kingly rule. This is why in that situation where the people are only the rich and the poor, those who command and those who obey, and there's not equality. There is not an equality of people with enough means that they are capable of being a political body. I think this is a very interesting point here. That therefore you cannot make a republic there. You cannot. It'll be a disaster, a political body. And that's what a republic means in a sense. A republic is a political body, be it either an oligarchic or democratic or popular, or this is the whole point here. The reason is this, that where there is so much corrupt matter that the laws are not enough to check it, together with them, greater force is needed to give order there. A kingly hand that is that with absolute and excessive power puts a check on the excessive ambition and the corruption of the powerful. In other words, if you have a corrupt people, in other words, you can't rely on the laws to check. You need what? You have to have a executive authority or a kingly power that can that is an absolute and excessive power to put a check on the excessive ambitions and corruption of the powerful. This reason is verified with the example of Tuscany, where one sees 3 republics, the Florence, Seneca, and Lucca, have long been a small space of territory, and these other cities in that province are seen to be servile in such a mode that one sees that with spirit and with order they would maintain or would like to maintain their freedom. In other words, there's 3 republics, right? But and those the example, right? And have been there in a small space of territory. That all the other cities of that province are seen to be servile and serve such a mode that one sees that with spirit and order they would maintain or would like to maintain their freedom. All have arisen because in that province there is no lord of a castle, or very few gentlemen. But there is so much equality that a civil way of life would be easily introduced there by a prudent man having knowledge of ancient civilizations. In other words, if someone was there and has prudent, they could do that. Why? Because there's not in other words, there's what he says, that in that province there's no lord of a castle, great man, and very few gentlemen who have great wealth. But there is so much equality there that a prudent man having knowledge of this could introduce a civil way of life. But its misfortune has been so great that up to these times it has not run into any man who had been able or known how to do it. In other words, this had bad fortune. They had, in other words, literally, this is again, been beaten by, literally been beaten by, right? This is that they've had not run into a beaten by. In other words, they have not had a man, have not run into or beaten by a man knows how to do this. They've not had a person who's been able to do this, bring an order in that sense. Thus, this conclusion may be drawn from this discourse, that he who wishes to make a republic a republic where there are very many gentlemen, cannot do it unless he first eliminates them all. And that he who is where there is very much equality and wishes to make a kingdom or make a principality, will never be able to make it unless he draws from that equality many of the ambitious and unquiet spirits, and make them gentlemen in fact and not in name, granting them castles and possessions, and giving them favor in belongings, in the belongings and men. In other words, this is Machiavelli's Discourses Florentum Renum Post Mortem Injurius Lanternae Medes, right? Written in 1520 in his Tutti of the Opera, right? The belonging is literally substance. They're subsistences. So the word belonging, the subsistences in men, favor of their, in other words, their wealth. You have to take away the wealth of them. In other words, if you're going to make that, you have to take the wealth away from the people. Their sustenances. And they're men, right? So in other words, if you want to make a kingdom, a principality, you have to have the means to do it. And sorry, it's not going to happen. If you have that equality. In other words, if you have to make men great and powerful, and you have to do that by taking the wealth away from the people, and the men away from the people. So he needs to make gentlemen, but he's not going to, or men in a castle, right? This ain't going to be that easy. So placed in the midst of them, through them he maintains his power, and they through him maintain their ambition, right? So therefore he has to have the gentleman, right? He needs these. He has the great king, the lord in the castle, and his gentleman that he can only get there. He says, so placed in the midst of them, through them he maintains his power, and they through him maintain their ambition. All others are constrained to endure the yoke that force, and never anything else can make them endure. So only force, coercion, force, violence, the yoke of force. You have to suppress them in that sense. That's how you create a monarchical order. So therefore, these are the two mechanisms. First, you have great gentlemen. You have great gentlemen. You can't make a republic. You need to eliminate all of them. And if you have the opposite, you have to make them, right? And this is the point you talked about. Since there is proportion by this way, from whoever forces to whomever is forced, men stand firm, each in his orders. So therefore, there's a proportion. The force and the proportion of force, right? And obey. Because the making of a republic from a province suited to be a kingdom. Now, because the making of a republic from a province suited to be a kingdom, and the making of a kingdom from one suited to be a republic, is a matter for a man who is rare in brain activity and authority. There has been many who had wished to do it, and few who have known how to conduct it. For the greatness of the thing partly terrifies men, partly impedes them, so that they fail at the very first beginning. In other words, what you have to do is basically, if you want to produce, in other words, he's saying what terrifies them is you have to do all this evil. You have to really do violence. Either you have to do violence against the great or violence against the people, right? The many. You have to use force. You have to constrain. In other words, two things. You have to eliminate the great. The many gentlemen cannot do it. You must first eliminate them. Okay. So that's the whole point about this. Is why, and this is why they fail in the first beginning. They compromise. They don't do that. They don't do it, and therefore they fail. Or they don't do they're not able to take everything they need to make the people subsist, take their subsistence away from them, and to create these gentlemen who live so idly off the land, their wealth, right? I believe that the experience of the Venetian Republic, in which none can have any rank except those who are gentlemen, will appear contrary to this opinion of mine, which that where there are gentlemen, a republic cannot be altered. To which it may be replied that this example does not impugn it, because in that republic they are gentlemen more in name than in fact. In other words, they have their status. The idea of the gentleman is their status. And they have the name instead. In other words, they don't live idly. They live off commerce. For they do not have great incomes from possessions, since their great richnesses are found in trade and movable things. And besides, none of them hold a castle or has any jurisdiction over men. But that name of gentleman among them is a name of dignity and reputation, without being founded on any of those things that make them be called gentlemen in other cities. In other words, a gentleman in Machiavelli's conception is a name in in other words, in name versus fact. In fact means you have lots of possessions and have the means to command from them or force others to do things. Okay, that is the clear implication of what that in fact means. In name is that you just have the status of a gentleman, and in fact the Venetians have it because of trade and commerce. They don't live idle. They're busy. In other words, so therefore this is a different thing. In other words, at one point he talked about corruption. He implied that trade. How can you have a corrupt people with corrupt manners? Trade, maybe that republic, right? Trade is the mechanism that would should be gentlemen in that sense, right? They're able to do this and have the status of this. They're able to be, as is the other republics, have all their divisions under various names. So Venice is divided into the gentlemen and the people. The popular, the gentlemen and the popular, right? And they wish that the former have, or are able to have, all the honors. In other words, the gentlemen have the honors. The former, the people, the gentleman is that, right? The former have, or are able to have, all the honors. The others are altogether excluded from them, right? The people are excluded from them. That does not produce disorder in that town, for the reason given at another time, and that is literally chapter again 6, book 6, Discourses 6:1, right, in the first thing. Was it? Literally, that is in book 1, chapter 6, the first paragraph. We talked about it, right? So that it does not produce a disorder because of that situation, which we talked about in chapter 6. Thus, he constitutes a republic where a great equality exists or has been made. Thus, he constitutes a republic where a great equality exists or has been made. And on the contrary, where a principality orders a principality where there's a great inequality. So, if you're going to constitute a republic, you have to have a great equality. It exists or has been made, or if there's a great inequality, you can only propose a principality. Otherwise, you would produce a thing without proportion, and therefore it won't last. The proportion of forces. In other words, the forces of the two sections will not have proportionality of force, and therefore its instability would lead it to collapse. And here is the chapter and how it ends. Okay, you can hear my cough back. I'm sorry about that. We'll stop here. We'll hope any questions or comments, please put them on there, and we'll answer them when I see them. Like the like button, hit the like button. Share, if you liked it, share it. Hit the like button. Share the social media. Share it on your friends. Share it, email it to your buddies to get the message out far and wide. Share far and wide. Right? All can help. So, commenting, liking, sharing, all of this helps the algorithm out. If you have not already subscribed, please subscribe. Encourage friends to come and check the channel out and subscribe, you can see the other books, read stuff we've done, and things we do, and maybe you can check out the live streams when we get back to doing them. I apologize for being out sick for this. Then what you need to do is hit the, again, now if you didn't like it, you can thumbs down, of course, but say why in the comments. This way people can benefit from it. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me on my social media links. The links are below. If you want to know more about me as an academic, a scholar, and check out my research, you can check the academic social media links. And if you want to help me to do what I do here, you know, I can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar, or by buying one of my books that are listed below, either at an online distributor, your local bookstore, online distributors like Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, or the like, or through the publishers themselves. Well, therefore, that's it. We turn to the next chapter next time. Take care and have a great day.